Along with individual experts, Surgeon Masters brings you life improvement strategies in 10 minutes. These proven principles and strategies are easy to learn and can be applied immediately, allowing you to practice your best. Here's your host, Jeff Smith.
On this episode of the Surgeon Masters mini podcast, I have with me Margie Nelson, a healthcare quality and safety specialist who has worked in multiple healthcare settings focused on the patient experience and risk management. Welcome, Margie.
Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much for the opportunity to share what I've learned. I hope it speaks to someone who's listening and eases their burden in their work.
And tell us a little bit more about your background.
I've spent the last 20 years as a hospital quality and safety specialist, handling risk, quality improvement, communication enhancement. And I come to you after growing up as the daughter of the chairman of anatomy at George Washington University. My dad was an immigrant from Pakistan with the commensurate values and expectations, and he was a very profound influence in my life.
And so that took you to where?
I was always guided towards medicine and pre-med. And in my 20s, my dad developed hepatitis C, or non-A, non-B, as it was referred to then. He got it from a blood transfusion 20 years earlier and needed a liver transplant. So I cared for him through his journey. Dad received a liver transplant in 1990 from the preeminent Tom Starzl at the University of Pittsburgh, but he died from a side effect of the experimental immunosuppressant study that he had joined. And then my patient advocacy 20 years later, when my husband turned yellow at the age of 37 and then was rushed to the Mayo Clinic in liver failure from hepatitis C that he contracted from blood transfusions from a car accident when he was 17 years old. So I saw the symptoms that I witnessed in my father 24 hours before his drug-induced seizure and death, and I begged my husband's physician team to listen to what I thought was happening to him.
And what happened then?
Well, one physician listened. Most of them kind of blew me off because they had a routine with liver transplant patients. And making this very long story short, they changed the immunosuppressant that my husband was on, which is now the commonly used Prograf. And due to the sacrifice that my dad made in the research dosing study he participated in, lots of people don't have to take cyclosporin anymore. Prograf is much less toxic, but my husband did not tolerate it very well. And so when they changed the immunosuppressant, he actually survived the post-liver transplant. And as a result, our children, who were 5 and 7 at the time, had about 20 more years with their dad.
Well, that's a great outcome from that life experience.
Well, I realized the importance of partnership between patient families and physicians, and the fragile balance of power and information sharing between patients, families, and physicians.
Tell us, one of the profound lessons that you have learned.
I think quality of care is directly related to how well a patient understands what the physician is telling them and complies and is dedicated to their health. And physicians, I feel like, don't always have time to develop the relationship that a patient requires to have that trust and that wanting to do what the patient says for themselves. A lot of times they go home, they forget, they don't get their medicine, they eat wrong, they don't do what the physician says, and that affects the outcome. So I think that's what I've learned, and that's what I've really dedicated my time for, helping patients communicate with their physicians.
And so it sounds like that communication, one of the key things you highlight is the relationship.
That's true. That's true. I think, honestly, I get all my best information from Dr. Tom Lee, who's the Chief Medical Officer of Press Ganey.
Tell us more.
So one of the things that I think about a lot is physician leadership and connecting with your direct reports as a physician leader. Because I feel like if a physician doesn't have good communication with his peers and his superiors, it's much harder for them to develop communicating relationships with their patients. I've observed this, and it's observed the effort to try to improve. And I think what that involves is setting aside time to chat individually with each of the clinical staff that is your direct report on a scheduled periodic basis. And sometimes if you have 300 people that report to you, a scheduled periodic basis is once a year. But it doesn't have to be a sit down all the time. It can be an acknowledgement, a hi in the hall, a team meeting, but really having periodic touch bases with the people that report to you. And the way that you can use these connection points with your staff member there's a couple of different ways. You could visit each clinician once a quarter if you don't have 300 while you're in the building relationship phase. So the building relationship phase really takes the time. The next thing is really set the expectation that your door is open so that clinicians can come to you with suggestions and with concerns and with challenges they're facing, and that it's not a closed door because you're too busy to spend time with them or hear what they have to say. The next point that I think is really important is exhibiting the characteristics that you want them to develop and show with their patients and families. And then the last thing is that there's a 4-question model that Tom Lee developed to use in your meetings that help increase physician awareness of medical interactions from the perspective of the patient. So the first question is, ask your physician report, what are we doing right? This question requires the clinician to think about what's going well, even if everything in the department isn't perfect. And it establishes positive intent. If a clinician cannot think of anything going right, the problem might be deeper than the hospital challenges. Then the second question is, what could we be doing better? And there'll be opportunities that you'll hear that are absolutely not actionable. I always hear, we need more staff. We're short-staffed. We need more staff. And that may not be actionable. However, if you resist the effort to argue or explain and listen, you can acknowledge the challenges and ask, what would make things better for their point of view? I have this budget. We have this number of positions. What would you do in my shoes? Ask for partnership in addressing the challenges rather than shutting them down and saying, no more money, no more staff. The third question is, what gives you joy? The opportunity to build personal connections and learn about things you can follow up on in the future. People will work harder for you when they know that you care about them as people. So encourage the sharing of good things personally, good things professionally, and what they're looking forward to. Know who their kids are, know if they're going on a vacation, know if they're getting a certification or they're having a terrible problem with a particular area of their career so that you can refer back to it when you see them casually in the hall. And then the last question, question number 4 is, would you like to recognize someone on our team that makes a difference to you? Opening a dialogue about those who are bringing positivity to all the team's work gives a leader insight into what's going well from a practice lens, and it's in a positive way. So when you follow up with positive words or a personal note to those who are making a positive difference on your team, like care, teamwork, practice, and habits, or colleague attitudes, or leaders who inspire, or department or service line interoperability, you're increasing the positive intent in your team. And I'll say this about sending personal notes. A number of years ago, I was meeting with a group of chief medical officers in my organization and having the same discussion. And each CMO spoke fondly of the folder that they had in their desk, which carried notes of gratitude and recognition from patients. These notes were saved over years of their careers, and they could remember them by memory, and they pulled them out when they needed a little encouragement. Written recognition means something to people and is cherished in their time with you as their leader.
Margie, thanks so much for sharing those concepts on physician leadership.
Well, you're welcome.
There you have it. In less than 10 minutes, this is Jeff Smith, along with Margie Neslin. Until the next episode of Life Improvement Strategies for the Surgeon Who Wants More. Ciao.
Now, take 10 minutes and put your plan into action to practice your best.